Welcome back, Focus Learners. Today, we're doing something really special. We are diving into a rigorous, clinical, psychological autopsy of arguably anime's most chilling antagonist, Johann Liebert from the series Monster. But listen, we aren't just going to debate whether he's evil. We are going to use real-world psychiatric frameworks to understand exactly how his mind broke. It's an explainer you definitely won't want to miss.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll look at the Hollywood psychopath problem, meet Johann, dig into the roots of ontological insecurity, unpack the true versus false self, dissect the nameless monster, and finally, look at his final escape. Let's jump right in.
Section 1. The Hollywood psychopath problem. Fiction versus reality.
You know, forensic psychiatrists constantly roll their eyes at how mainstream media portrays psychopaths. They almost always suffer from a few massive limitations. First up, writers love to confuse psychopathy with psychosis, giving characters hallucinations, which, fun fact, is absolutely not a psychopathic trait. Then there's this huge overemphasis on bloody violence rather than the truly chilling lack of empathy. Third, their motivations are usually ridiculously simple, like being pure evil or just having a bad day as a kid. And finally, Hollywood just loves the unrealistic evil genius supercomputer trope. All of this creates a huge public misconception about what actual psychopathy looks like.
To really grasp the scope of this problem, look at this landmark 2013 study from the Journal of Forensic Sciences. Psychiatrists looked at 400 fictional psychopaths in cinema, spanning nearly a century. And the findings? Literally staggering. 95% of these portrayals were completely unrealistic. Only about 5%, we're talking just 21 characters out of 400, actually depicted realistic clinical psychopathy.
Which brings us to Section 2. Meet Johann Liebert, the 5% exception.
Clinical psychologists and forensic experts actually single out Johann's characterization for praise. Why does this matter for our analysis? Because Johann isn't just a scary cartoon villain. He's a literal masterclass in accurate psychology. His portrayal aligns perfectly with psychiatrist Hervey Cleckley's foundational concept of the mask of sanity. We're talking about a charming, highly intelligent man who maintains an absolutely flawless public persona, all while completely lacking emotional empathy. It's chillingly accurate. But to truly crack Johann's mind, we have to look at a concept formulated by psychiatrist R.D. Laing called ontological insecurity. Imagine feeling more unreal than real, literally, feeling more dead than alive. For someone experiencing this, everyday life isn't just boring, it's a constant, deadly threat. They are terrified of being absorbed or completely wiped out just by the mere gaze of others. This profound existential terror, that's the bedrock of Johann's entire worldview.
Section 3. Roots of ontological insecurity. Anatomy of a trauma. So how did he get this way? Johann's sense of reality shattered through a highly specific chain of events. It all starts with his mother's desperate escape to the Three Frogs to hide her identical twins. But years later, the monster himself, Franz Bonaparte, tracks them down. He forces the mother to choose which child to hand over to an experimental nightmare. She hesitates, but eventually sends the sister, Nina. Johann is left behind. When Nina returns days later and recounts the absolute horror she faced, Johann's mind just breaks. Since the twins were constantly dressed exactly alike to hide their identities, Johann's boundaries of self completely dissolve. He absorbs her trauma and actually begins to believe he was the one sent away.
Now, think about this devastating rhetorical question, because it mimics Johann's exact existential crisis. When their mother hesitated, looking at her identical children dressed exactly the same, did she even know who she was choosing? Johann realizes his survival is entirely dependent on pretending to be someone else. So he concludes he isn't even real. He becomes an illusory twin. In his own mind, his sister is the real, substantial human being, and he is just a fake imposter meant to ward off danger.
Section 4. True versus false self. The inner wasteland.
To survive this unbearable reality, Johann's mind essentially split in two. The true self withdrew deep into an unembodied inner wasteland, basically locking itself in a vault to prevent being judged or destroyed by the outside world. The thing interacting with reality is just the false self, acting merely as a protective shell or a decoy. Johann truly believed his sister Nina was the real, living human, and that he was just the empty, fake decoy meant to absorb all the world's cruelty.
To really visualize this, listen to this chilling quote from one of Dr. Laing's actual clinical patients. The patient describes their inner world as a barren landscape with absolutely no life in sight, their feet stuck in mud. This perfectly mirrors what Johann calls the scenery of doomsday. Mentally, Johann never made it out of that wasteland. His soul retreated there permanently, leaving only an empty body walking the earth.
And you know, this inner wasteland explains the most brilliant psychological twist in the entire story. Why did the brutal, mind-breaking experiments at the Kinderheim 511 orphanage completely fail to break Johann? Well, because his true self was already completely out of reach. His body was just a false front. You can't psychologically torture or break someone who has already committed existential suicide. Johann was a ghost long before he ever walked through the doors of that orphanage.
Section 5. The Nameless Monster, a Fatal Self-Deception.
Over the years, Johann used so many names. Franz, Eric, Johann. But his most atrocious lie wasn't his aliases. No, it was wearing the mask of the Nameless Monster from Franz Bonaparte's picture book. He actually convinced himself that he was nothing but a void. By suppressing his sensitivity to play the role of the monster, he enacted the ultimate, tragic defense mechanism against a world that had always tried to destroy him.
So I want to challenge you to consider something here. Was Johann born a psychopath, or was he made into one by a world that demanded a false self? It's really a tragedy of adaptation. He played dead, existentially speaking, to survive monsters like Bonaparte, but in doing so he completely forgot he was ever human at all.
Section 6. The Final Escape, Ruhenheim, and Resurrection. Now we reach the climax. Johann's carefully constructed delusion completely collapses at Ruhenheim. First, he finds Bonaparte's old childhood sketches of the twins, and seeing them, he realizes a terrifying truth. Bonaparte actually felt sympathy for them. He was no longer a threat. This triggers a completely devastating epiphany for Johann. His entire existential suicide, his deeply held belief that he needed to become an empty monster to survive, was based on a lie. He had thrown his soul into oblivion for absolutely nothing.
Which brings us to that haunting final imagery of the series. A room full of sunlight, an open window, and a messy, empty hospital bed. Now, a lot of people think Johann jumped, but clinically and metaphorically, it represents a resurrection. Dr. Tenma visiting him, validating that his mother truly loved him and gave him a real name, was a profound act of love. That messy bed isn't a sign of suicide. It's undeniable proof that a real, living, breathing human being had finally been there. The nameless monster was officially put to rest.
So, I leave you with this final, lingering thought. If the delusion of the nameless monster is finally broken, and Johann has accepted his right to exist, his true self finally stepping out of that inner wasteland, who is the man that walked out of that hospital room? It's a fascinating question about the ultimate fate of a fully realized, deeply human Johann Liebert. Thanks for joining me on this psychological explainer today, and as always, keep learning.